Hey guys, and welcome to Punkaholics, brought to you by the Punk Scholar Network. This is a podcast where we talk about everything that's punk. My name is Precious Adediran, and my host, Carly Polchak, will be taking you on this journey of Punkaholics this episode. Today's episode, episode 2, is called Punk and Scholar Academics. We have a very special guest here today. His name is called Paul Fields, who is a music academic and sociologist all the way from the UK. Yep, that's right, he is all the way from the UK, showing his research in looking at the punk's relationship between controversy, humour and religion. Phil starts off the conversation with his origin of punk through his natural musical abilities and how he came into contact with the Punk Scholar Network. He bears all exciting news on speaking at conferences in the UK and Canada, so get your pens and calendars ready and definitely be on the lookout for those dates, because I know I am. In this episode, he talks on his upcoming research project about safe spaces at the punk events and breaks down what a safe space looks like. He explains the relationship between punk and the mainstream world and what it looks like as a professor that prioritizes embedding and incorporating punk into his teachings. This conversation is jam-packed with loads of diverse knowledge, experiences, and hope for what punk can look like in the near future. I can't wait for you all to listen to this. So as we deep dive into this conversation of punk ethos, make sure you like and comment. And finally, let's listen up for Paul Fields.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Ask the first question, and my first question to you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so my name is Paul Fields. I work at a university just outside of London in the UK, and my job is kind of probably quite similar to Ellen's in a lot of ways, in that I teach essentially one subject, but I try to get as much music in there as possible. So I teach sociology, but on across 12 different courses, 10 undergraduate courses and 2 postgraduate courses. I came to academia late, so I didn't start my undergraduate degree until I was 28. Prior to that, I spent my late teens and most of my 20s playing guitar in a punk band. And that all ended for me at about 25 years old. And as is usually the case when when careers as a musician end, it wasn't my choice that it ended. It made the decision for me. And then I think probably the correct expression is bummed about for a few years, working out what am I going to do with my life. And being someone who didn't do well at school, university was never really an option for me at 18 when most people go. But the more I looked around at courses and the more I realized that you can study things like music, which wasn't as common when I was 18. I went to uni at 28 and suddenly realized that being in a university is something that I love. Just the environment, the way of learning, very different from my experience of school. I decided within the first year of being at uni that not only do I want to be an academic, but actually that, like, what I thought was a failed music career actually was preparation for me being a music academic. So I've been doing that now for 10 years, working at the university that I currently work at. And my research is pretty much all to do with punk in various ways. I'm interested in punk and humor, punk and controversy, punk and criminology. Basically, however I can shoehorn punk into something close to a scholarly academic subject. Was there anything that I sort of anything I should have talked about that I didn't?
No, that's perfect. And actually, so I didn't realize that you were in a band. So most of our questions are going to focus on the academic research side of things. But like, if you would like to share a little bit more about being in a band.
Well, I did. I mean, you obviously have forgot the link to my band that I sent you when you were in London in December.
Ooh.
How embarrassing! How embarrassing!
How embarrassing that is. Yeah. So tell us more about it.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, no, the prior band. I knew.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So the prior band. Okay. Right. Yeah. So I play in a band now, but only part time, and like I'm not in the band technically. So I play live for a 3-piece band. They're a 3-piece punk band. They're all kind of in their early 30s. Me, as a man in his 40s, there's something about saying, "Oh, I play part time in a band," that just doesn't sound that. For a man of my age, it just doesn't sound quite right. So I'm not in the band technically, but whenever they play live, I play backup guitar, backup vocals, a bit of keys. But I don't have to do any recording. I don't have to do any interviews. I don't have to do any photos, any of that stuff. I just get to play with them live now. The band is called Borts, which is a Simpsons reference, which is...
Yeah, I knew about that.
Yeah. But the band I played in before, we were a ska punk band. So that there was, we were sort of a few years behind the States. So the States had this sort of ska punk boom, sort of mid 90s. And I was doing it from 98 to 2005, around that kind of time. Horn section, loud guitars, choppy ska guitars, and that kind of stuff. Signed to a label called Moonscar, which is a New York-based record label. Yeah.
All right, so I guess we can start off with some of the questions that we have here.
My question is, when did you start listening to punk?
Good question. Well, I guess it depends on your definition of punk, because so I've always played music. I started playing piano when I was like 6, and then I moved on to the trumpet when I was probably 9, and then when I was 11 or 12, so I would have been 12. I discovered Nirvana because Kurt Cobain died, and that was I just became obsessed not only with learning the guitar, but learning the guitar and specifically learning Nirvana songs. Now, if you count Nirvana as a punk band, then that's the first punk band I listened to. But what I essentially did was started working, as you often do, you work your way backwards. When you find a band that you like or an artist you like, you look at who influenced them and who influenced them. So when I was 12 years old is when I first started listening.
I have a question. In what ways has punk changed your life?
Oh, that's a very good question. In some ways, it hasn't changed my life. This is something I've been trying to articulate this for a little while, like in my head, because it's hard to describe. So when I first discovered or came into contact with punk, and I don't mean Nirvana, I mean going back into a lot of the bands, like the US bands from the 1980s, it felt like this music and this attitude and this whole world described my outlook on the world already. That was the thing that really attracted it to me, was the fact that it made sense of kind of who I was, how I sat within my social group, my attitudes, my beliefs, my values. So in that sense, it didn't change me. It made sense for me. How has it changed me? I mean, I don't think I could be doing the job that I do right now if punk didn't exist, because it's given me an outlet to it's given me a way of earning money through my job. I don't think I could or would want to work in a university if I didn't get to talk about punk a lot of the time. But yeah, in terms of who I am, it's hard to explain because it was like it already made sense to me. Yeah, maybe I've become more politically engaged because of punk. That might be one way it's changed me.
So,
Okay.
does your personal style / fashion express your interest in punk?
It definitely used to. It definitely used to. So I don't know how well you can see it. So I have a nose ring. So I used to have lots and lots of piercings. I got a nose ring because I thought that was a very punk thing to do when I was 16, and it's the only piercing that I still have. But no, I mean, so some, I have some jackets with loads of like pins on and that kind of thing that I sometimes wear. But I would say, well, do you know what? I haven't really changed the way I dress or the way I look really over the last 25 years. But I think that probably elements of punk fashion have made their way into the mainstream. So like big thick rimmed glasses like this, I've had these since I was, well, versions of these since I was 14 years old. You didn't really see people wearing glasses like this unless they were old people. We have the NHS in the UK, the National Health Service, that provided free glasses that kind of looked like this. So they were kind of seen as quite uncool because they were national health glasses because they were thick rimmed and they weren't trendy or anything. So I would say, so the question was, does it influence the way I dress? Yeah, I mean, it does a bit. I wear band T-shirts sometimes, but I think that, punk style, and when I say punk style, I mean, my version of punk is predominantly the punk that came out of the States in the 80s and 90s. And I think that style has sort of been absorbed by the mainstream, over those years. So, yeah, if that answers the question.
Hi, I'm Precious. I'm a fellow.
Hi, Precious.
I'm a Londoner too. Great to hear another Brit.
Oh, amazing.
But my question is, where do you see punk going in the near future?
Very good question. That is a very good question. I don't know. I mean, again, I think it depends on how you conceive punk. Certainly within my own world, within the world that I operate in, it seems like a lot of the people that are going to shows, or certainly the ones that I go to, are actually older, and a lot of them, even a lot of the bands that I'm listening to that are younger, like younger bands, are playing music that seems to reference or make reference to, that kind of 90s era of punk. And then you've got a lot of bands that are, very mainstream pop bands with guitars that clearly have some kind of influence or have been influenced by punk, but are not punk. So where can I see it going? I don't know. They've just opened up a punk rock museum in Las Vegas, which I'm hoping to go to in July. But and it's like artifacts from the last 5 decades, 12,000 square feet. But I don't know. I mean, it's all stuff in the past. Obviously, I don't know where it's going. It could be. It's going. It certainly in my own world, in terms of punk scholarship, there's loads of exciting things happening. But a lot of that, I think, is either looks backwards or looks at the present of punk. I don't really know where it's going. It needs something new and exciting to happen musically, and it's just whether that's. But then also, don't forget, I'm kind of at that stage now where I'm not so into acquiring new music. Like I've sort of got all the music I like, and I'm happy with that. So I'm probably quite ignorant to where it's going, is probably the answer I should have said at the start.
Yeah, I get that. And obviously, you said that you have a lot of musical background, but what bands or groups like inspired you to start listening to punk in the first place?
So yeah, I mean, initially it was so Nirvana is where I kind of started, but I went back to, I mean, it was bands like NoFX, Bad Religion, Rancid. I mean, Descendants was a band that I really felt kind of explained a lot of me to me as I went back through their albums. Descendants, and then they have a sister band called All, which is the Descendants with a different singer. Yeah, very fast, kind of heartfelt lyrics. I'd say probably retrospectively, in some cases, some quite problematic lyrics. Yeah, so those kinds of bands that were on, I mean, really, it was bands that were on either the Fat Records label or Epitaph label, some Nitro Records, Bleeding Heart Records, which is a European label. Yeah, is that a thorough enough answer, or do you want me to go through more artists?
Yeah, I mean, did you see that the Descendants they're touring?
It's, a friend of mine sent me a thing this morning. They're doing 2 dates in the UK.
Oh, nice.
But one of they're weird locations. In fact, no, they're playing Bournemouth, which is just down the road from me. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll go. I've seen them a few times, and I saw All about 10 years ago, and they played a tiny little venue, and that was amazing. I saw Descendants probably 5 or 6 years ago, and they played, I think it was, anyway, the kind of venue they play is huge, and you can sit at the back, and yeah, I'd kind of prefer those more intimate shows. Yeah,
it's good though. I'm glad to see that they're going back on tour. So
yeah, and they're like 100 years old or whatever. But yeah.
Cool. So I guess we can go to our next question.
Yeah. Hi. So my question is, how would you describe the relationship between punk and mainstream music?
Oh, well, at various times they've been the same thing. So if you think about the UK in the 1970s, loads of punk bands are on major labels. So in many ways, that is mainstream. And they're mainstream. They were mainstream in terms of they were selling lots of records. They were charting, high numbers, top 10. Punk bands were having top 10 singles back when that was kind of more of a thing. In some ways, that even though it wasn't mainstream in its look or its sound, if you're signed to a major label and you're selling lots of records, then you're kind of mainstream. And then you fast forward to the mid 1990s, and punk became kind of, I guess you'd say, a household name again, but not in the same way as in the UK in the 70s. It was still mostly independent, not all, but mostly independent records. And I, from my perspective, I know that colleagues within the Punk Scholars Network would disagree with me on this, but had more of an independent spirit to it, I think, than what happened in the UK in the 70s. And I think that came from a very vibrant DIY punk scene in the States in the early 80s. So, I mean, punk is kind of inherently not mainstream, but it has been mainstream at various points. And if you look at bands like, none of them come to mind because I don't listen to that kind of music, but there are like guitar-based bands, like teenagers now making music that have loud guitars that probably, 20 years ago would have sounded more punk in comparison to the music that was being released at the time. Now, because it's become, that kind of sound has become more mainstream, it's sort of been subsumed. Would that be the right word? Subsumed. So, people will tell you that punk, that punk can't ever be mainstream, but it depends on what you mean by the mainstream, and it depends on what you mean by punk. And clearly, if by mainstream you mean stuff that a lot of people listen to, that a lot of people are familiar with, that is part of a mainstream music industry structure, then it has been mainstream a number of times. Currently, I don't think it is. Questions are getting harder though, so yeah.
Yeah, they're going to get increasingly more difficult. That's how we planned it.
Excellent.
My question is, what is your relationship with a local punk scene?
Okay, great question. Yeah, I have a very, very close relationship with my local punk scene. So when I was growing up, there was a very, very vibrant punk scene where I lived. Like I had, probably a group of, I don't know, maybe 50 friends, and we all went to a few different schools, but we were all friends because we liked the same kind of bands. We'd go to gigs together and listen to records together and just hang out. And, our shared interest was punk. Now, a lot of those people have grown up, got real jobs, got families, and still listen to that kind of music, but aren't really involved in the scene in the same way. But a good friend of mine who I've not ever played in a band with, but whose band my band played with a lot, owns a local music venue to me. So where I live is Salisbury, which is so very close to Stonehenge. For those of you that have any idea where Stonehenge is in the UK. So it's sort of quite rural. It's not, we're about an hour and a half from central London. But we're we're a city technically, but we are a small city. But yeah, so he owns a venue. Pretty much all the events are free entry. So he makes money on the bar, and there's, bands you've heard of, bands you've never heard of. And most nights of the week, there's stuff happening. And that is, I would say it's extremely DIY in the sense that, the guy owns the venue. He books all the bands. He does most of the live sound. He plays gigs there himself. And this is someone that I've known since I was at college. So 23 years. And while I'm not involved in booking or the organizational management of that venue, I've played there a bunch of times with the band I play in now. And a lot of my friends now in my locale are still friends that have been formed around a shared interest in music.
So the next question would be, do you write about punk? And if you do, what do you write about?
Oh yeah, I do. I write loads about punk. That's kind of like, if I had my way, I do love teaching at my job, but I would do less teaching and do more writing. I'm currently nearing the end of a PhD on punk. And what my PhD project is about, you'll probably all be familiar with the concept of safe spaces. So you kind of have two different forms of safe spaces. One is like, say, for example, if we said this is a safe space, this room, it means we can say anything within this space and not be held accountable for it outside. Let's say you wanted to ask me, questions about like things I've experienced growing up, whatever. I know I could tell you in the full confidence that you wouldn't share it outside of this space. That's one conception of a safe space. So you're safe to say whatever you want. Another form of safe space is a safe space where you are safe from things rather than being safe to do things. And those are, safe from various kinds of unpleasant experiences, some of which have legal ramifications and others don't. And increasingly at punk events, there are safe space policies. And some of them are like common sense, don't be a dick, and variations of that. But for some people, and often it's kind of older people, they find these policies not only to be quite restrictive on how you can behave at these events, but they see them as being quite anti-punk. They see punk as being about saying whatever you want, no restrictions, and a formal policy is against that. My PhD tries to understand the motivations behind people that oppose those policies. So what is it that people oppose? What what are the motivations behind the people that oppose those policies? What are the reasons? What are the things about those policies that are problematic? So so there's that. I mean, I've written about punk and craft beer. I've written about punk and
explain that one. Talk a little bit about that one.
Oh, the punk and craft beer. So so there have been so in the UK we have a brewery called Brewdog. I think they've opened some bars in the States. I think
they're in the US. I don't know where,
but so and they have a beer called Punk IPA, and they play a hell of a lot on this whole like punk ethos. They've got a book. If I could reach my bookshelf from here, I'd get it. They've written a book it's called Business for Punks, and it's all about how this punk ethos has influenced the way they go about their business. But if they've been accused of doing quite of being bullies in many ways. So they've trademarked the word punk in relation to beer. So there was a bar in the UK that opened up that called itself Draft Punk, which is a reference to the French dance band Daft Punk. And the first thing that Brewdog did was sue them. So they're sort of claiming this sort of cool punk ethos, but very poorly defined punk ethos, I would say, but also at the same time acting in ways that many people would think are quite unpunk, and people have criticized them for being unpunk. And then there's a brewery in the States called Stone Brewing, which makes no claims to any punk sensibilities, but that partnered with the punk band NoFX to produce a NoFX themed beer. And then so I don't know how familiar you are with NoFX, whether that's something, Ellen, you've discussed as part of this. No. So how can I talk about NoFX in 30 seconds? They're a band that have been around since 1983. They use a lot of humor in their music. They've been quite influential, but I'd say they're a multi-racial group, but a lot of the humor they use in their lyrics and in their on-stage banter pokes fun at stereotypes in relation to their own ethnicities. And a lot of the humor is kind of, I guess what you would say is edgy, which, at one point, edgy humor would be something that you'd think sounds cool, but it kind of has a negative connotations, I think, now. But anyway, they've had artwork that, again, I could, if I twisted my laptop, I could show you. I've got a print in my kitchen of some artwork from an album they released that was banned in Germany because it contains an illustration of bestiality. But they use a lot of humor in their lyrics. They're a bit controversial. But anyway, they formed a relationship with this brewery, and then when the band arguably acted in a way that was consistent with the way that it always has, it received a lot of, well, this is a way that punk has interacted with the mainstream. It became like TMZ picked up a video of something they said that was quite controversial on stage. And yeah, lots of people became outraged about it. And then the brewery decided, they went into self-protection mode and severed the relationship and said, nothing about this, we thought punk was about being cool, but nothing about the comments this band made were cool. And then, like, as with a lot of these things, it was kind of forgotten about pretty soon afterwards. So what I've written about is how, essentially it's about producers of beer, but really it's more about just organizations and businesses outside of punk who like to appropriate punk ideas, but really sort of half thought out ideas of punk that are not really very well articulated, and then have suffered as a consequence, because punk is quite transgressive, and that's part of what makes a lot of people interested in it. It's certainly part of what makes me interested in it. So yes, these sort of organizations like to go, oh yeah, that part of punk, the sort of slightly rebellious bit, that's quite cool, and we can use this as a marketing device, which both breweries have done. But then when there are these uglier sides of punk that are there, whether you like them or not, when they appear, these organizations have realized, actually, no, that's not. Yeah, I don't know. I think I explained it better in London in December.
Yeah, that was
Ellen,
good. I don't think that Stone Brewing is selling their beer at the Punk Rock Museum, though. I don't think that's happening.
Well, what's interesting is you can still find their webpage for that beer, and it just says it's sold out. You can't buy it because it's sold out. But yeah, no, you're right. I don't think they'll be selling it there.
Yep.
But also, I mean, I think, like what interests me as well is like if you're NoFX, why are you partnering with a big company like Stone Brewing?
Yeah.
Couldn't you make your own beer?
I guess not in the future. Maybe one day.
Maybe that's the future of punk.
Yeah. Craft breweries.
What have you researched so far that is most surprising to you?
What have I researched around punk? What have I researched that's the most surprising to me? Well, a lot of the stuff I'm reading at the moment for my PhD surprises me because well, I mean, I guess it's not necessarily that surprising, but what I find is that when you research punk, a lot of it is in the social sciences, which is my world, and the social sciences are fantastic, but there are flaws to the some of the social sciences, and I read a lot of papers where someone's decided what they want to conclude, and then they work out how they get there. And one of the interesting things about punk as a concept is that you can kind of say anything is punk. So you can find with it, two articles that make two completely opposing arguments and use punk as the justification for the conclusion they arrive at. I'm quite surprised by. So for example, something I'm writing at the moment for a conference in Chicago that I'm going to in August. Ellen, are you going?
I am.
Okay, right. So the thing that I'm going to be talking about in the conference in Chicago is about punk and religion, and how you can. So nothing to do with anything supernatural in relation to religion, but people have done research into like the functions religion has for society, whether it's in terms of like who your social group, your values, or how you connect to things that you feel like are, like numinous, like things that are just beyond you that you can't quite explain. And I see a lot of dogmatism in not just in punk culture, but in punk writing. And that's what's fueled me to write this, or to compose this paper that will be an article. I want to look at whether you can see like religious type qualities within punk. So I'm surprised by how dogmatic punk writing can be, and in some cases actually more so by younger writers than older writers.
And what made you want to research punk originally?
I realized that so there's very few things that I'm very good at, and I realized that this is something that I'm kind of okay at. I like when you I hope this answers the question. Was it Lindsay that asked the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I hope this answers the question. When you plan to have a career as a musician, and I mean like playing popular music, not classical, not jazz, where often you're employed. When you want to make it as a rock star, in some form, that's something that often is there from a very early age. And when it ends, it can feel like a failure. And it did for me for a very long time. And it wasn't until I realized that my interest in punk, not just as a performer, but as an appreciator of the music, as a lover of the culture and the ideas, when I realized that it was possible to do that, and that was only through meeting some, an inspirational lecturer in my first year of university who who a lot of his work involved writing about punk, and I realized it was a thing. And I thought, well, I can totally do this. Because don't forget, I was 28, not knowing what the hell I was going to do with my life. So I had a sort of that hint of desperation. And actually, I think the concept of desperation in relation to punk is an interesting point for reflection. A lot of what makes punk, I think, very interesting musically and lyrically is that there is a lot of desperation in the lyrics, trying to get out of a situation or trying to achieve something. So yeah, I was kind of desperate, and then I saw that this was, I didn't know, I was so wet behind the ears to academia when I went to uni. I don't really know why I went. Part of the reason, this is recorded, isn't it? I won't say that. But part of it was personal reasons, nothing to do with university, is why I went to uni. I'm so sorry, Lindsay. The question was, what makes me want to write about punk? Is that it?
Like, what made you want to research punk? Like,
Well,
after?
yeah. So it was realizing that it was a thing, and being in a position where I had I'd acquired a number of seemingly disconnected skills that I was able to connect by researching punk.
We have just a couple questions left.
Okay.
How did you find out about the Punk Scholars Network?
There was a conference held in Northampton in the UK in 2016, and at that point, I was 2 or 3 years into my career as an academic, but still kind of finding my feet with really what I was, what I was doing. I work at a predominantly teaching-based institution, so a lot of the first few years of working was just taken up by working out how do I teach, spending 6 hours writing a 2-hour lecture, that kind of thing. So I was still kind of finding my feet, and a colleague at the time said he saw a call for papers at the 2016 conference, and I thought, the Punk Scholars Network, what an amazing idea this is. And so I put in an abstract. It was the first abstract for a conference I'd ever written, and much to my surprise, it got accepted. And so I went along and met a bunch of people that that were like me. So I heard about it through just I think it was, I forget the actual name of the organization, but it's like a mailing list that I'm signed up to that just sends through calls for papers that are anything to do with popular music studies, the Association of Popular Music Studies or something like that. And that's how I heard about it. And I've, it's been something that has been very close to my heart ever since.
And a follow-up question to that. What do you do for the Punk Scholars Network?
So I'm hosting. So it's the 10th annual UK conference this year. So I'm hosting that in December this year. But up until now, my involvement with the network has been quite passive, in the sense that I've engaged as an academic institution who I've presented at conferences. There's a sister journal that I've contributed to, but I'm very keen to be more involved with the network from a, what would you call it? I mean, administrative position. I think the network's going through a bit of a transition at the moment, trying to get some. I think they're trying to bring, they're trying to kind of diversify a bit, in various different ways. So yeah, I mean, the question was, how am I involved?
Mhm.
The short answer is, if things go my way, I'll be involved in whatever ways they'll have me.
Well, you get to organize the next conference, so
I'm
that's
organizing the next conference, and yeah, yes,
cool.
Okay, so my question for you
Hi,
is,
Joseph.
do you have any upcoming research plans?
Yes. So I'm yeah, this at the conference in Chicago in August, which is the 4th annual USA Canada Punk Scholars Network conference, but the first in-person
Something
conference.
like that. Yeah, it's like 3rd and a half, because there was one last year, I guess. I don't know, something like that.
So there's that, and for that I'm writing I'm presenting this paper on punk and religion, alongside, or sort of somewhat connected to that, although not directly, but on a similar theme. I'm really hoping to be co-editing a book on the band Bad Religion at some point in over the next couple of years, but that relies on a publisher agreeing to publish it. And of course my PhD. So things work a little bit differently in the UK than in the States. It's pretty much unheard of for someone not to have a PhD and be in a. You call it tenure in the States, but we just call it a job in the UK, a job with a contract. So yeah, my employer can't just fire me on a whim. So I don't have a PhD, but I have this wealth of industry experience. So you have a lot of academics teaching at universities in the UK who don't have PhDs, but they have what is called the equivalent of a PhD in professional experience. So I kind of have that, but I see myself predominantly as a researcher. So yeah, so I'm still doing my PhD. I hope to have that done within the next year or so. And then beyond that, yeah, I'm so sorry, Joseph. The question was what research am I doing? Is that
like any future research?
Future research, yeah. So yeah, there's the co-edited book. So that will be a book about the band Bad Religion, so Bad Religion has it's been around since I think they formed in the late 1970s, but they sort of had their peak in the 80s and 90s. But they're a band whose singer has a PhD. They're quite I'd say a cerebral band, or an intellectual band in terms of their lyrics and their outlook, and their fan base as well, kind of conscious of this. Yeah, that book, what that book is going to be. So I'll contribute to that. Am I allowed to say who the other contributor is?
Go for it.
So Ellen and I are trying to co-edit this book together. It will be a bunch of essays by other academics on how Bad Religion, let's say, intersects with scholarly stuff with the academy. But Ellen and I will each probably write a chapter, and we'll write other bits of bump for the book as well, if we can get a publisher.
Working on that.
And so yeah, so there's that. So there's and yeah, I am writing this thing on punk and religion for the conference, that will evolve into an article. And there are also, because it's looking at punk and dogmatism, that is coming out of my PhD. Once the PhD is done, I want only to write about punk, and it's just the sort of little bits that sort of what are my entry points into punk. So I'm a sociologist, so yeah, it will be things like deviance, religion. I'm also very interested in humor, and that was part of the reason for the NoFX article with the breweries, because it revolved around the telling of a joke. So yeah, anything to do with punk that that I can reasonably anything about punk that is related to my core skills as a sociologist.
Okay, and then for my last question, is there any final thoughts that you have, or just anything that you just talked about that you want to add to?
I don't think there's anything I want to that I've not explained it in as much detail as I'd have liked. I mean, thank you for having me for 48 minutes. I mean, the only concluding remarks I would have would actually be questions for you, and I don't know if you have the time or interest for that, or whether that's what whether that's not the purpose of this.
Yeah, no, I mean, whatever you want. If you want to, we have questions, you can go ahead and ask.
So what I know about this is that you are working on a project. Sorry, do you know what? I'm really sorry. I am not a technophobe, but I have an Apple computer and I resist any update. Like if it's an update, I say, no, I don't want it. And I've been doing that for a very long time until yesterday when I was in the middle of sending an email and the little icon went gray and said, your operating system no longer supports this email thing.
Oh, wow.
So I spent about an hour trying to get just the least old version of the operating system that would work for my email thing, and I accidentally downloaded the brand new Apple operating system, and it is awful. And I keep getting these notifications popping up everywhere, and that's not me. So I apologize for that.
Not very punk of you.
No, I was going to close these things down. Okay, right. So what was I saying? This is part of a project you're doing. It's connected to the Punk Scholars Network, and Ellen's asked you to put together some stuff. Just by a shake of the head, am I right in assuming that none of you have had any real interest in punk prior to this project? No, not really. Okay. In which case, then, a great question that was asked to me, which is what surprises me about punk. What is there anything that has surprised any of you about punk, given that you've been engaging with it in various ways?
Good question.
I'd have to say that I really enjoy the music. I grew up listening to punk here and there, but as Ellen gave us projects, I kind of was exposed to more. So it kind of made me go back and see other artists, other songs by artists that I like. So I guess just exposing myself to more punk has made me love it more.
Excellent. Fantastic.
Jamal, do you want to go?
I like how punk became mainstream. I feel like before it wasn't like we looked down upon, but it wasn't looked as something, big. And I liked how it just grew into something bigger. I feel like a lot of people see something, and if they're not familiar with it, they push it away until other people start to like it, and then they accept it more. So I just liked how it started off as one thing and it just blew up, and then it's still coming back to today. I feel like it's gonna come back eventually and blow up again, because there's a newest type of way of punk. I feel like it's kind of punk emo music, kind of is all mixed together, and it's still started off. It let the foundation for other genres and other stuff to expand.
Yeah, it's a really good point. When if you think about like emo, so for example, something I do with my students is about the 20-year cycle, how every 20 years fashions come back round, and it's no surprise that bands like My Chemical Romance are suddenly everyone's loving them again, and that's 20 years since that's their second album where they kind of blew up. So
yeah, Yeah, that was, we just talked about that last week, actually. I brought in a news story that one of the news stations around here had shared about, like, emo is back for a new generation, and here's why. And they talked about, it was very interesting. I thought it was, but it's,
yeah, I'm a collector of things. I like there's pretty much nothing I've ever bought that I've ever thrown away. So like I have like any ticket of any gig I've ever been to. I have some students now that are like big My Chemical Romance fans.
Yeah.
And I like to show them my ticket stubs from when I saw them in the early 2000s for like £6.
Yeah.
And now, you know, you're paying, I mean, I have no idea, probably three figures to go and see them.
Easily.
Yeah.
So cool. Any other final thoughts from anybody? Questions? Anything that we missed? I think we're good. All right. Well, thank you, Paul, for coming to talk to us and answering our many questions. And yeah, so the plan is to do something with the audio, and we'll share it. I'll be in touch, and we can, I'll let you know when we're ready to get this out there. But thank you for talking to us.
Thank you for having me. And you know, it's great to see that, you know, you're kind of engaging in it, and this sounds like a really exciting project for you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good one.
Nice to meet you all. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's Carly. Thanks for listening to this episode of Punkaholics. And I hope you enjoyed this interview with punk scholar and sociologist professor Paul Fields from the UK. I know I really did, and I had so much fun interviewing him. As we reflect back onto what Fields talks about within this episode, he speaks about his love for researching and writing about punk on an academic level. And he also talks about all the trials and errors that got him to the spot he's at today in academic writing. And of course, we talk about the type of music he listens to and the band that he plays in part-time, which is super cool in my opinion. Fields definitely has some good taste in music. Fields also touches upon how the Punk Scholars Network is trying to diversify the organization and also the relationship between punk and the mainstream world in this episode of Punkaholics. As just a reminder, he will be presenting his current research about punk and religion at the 4th Annual U.S. and Canada Conference in Chicago, August 8th and August 9th, 2023. He will also be hosting the 10th Annual UK Conference this upcoming December in 2023. And a congratulations is in order for his plans to co-edit a book on the band Bad Religion with Dr. Ellen Bernhard. Listen on next week's episode of Punkaholics, where we interview lecturer of human geography and environmental justice, Dr. Tyler Sonicson. Don't forget to like this podcast and let us know your favorite band and what you thought of this episode. Again, thanks for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed this interview. It was so much fun making it. Thanks. Have a great day, guys.